I flew to Miami without warning and found my son between life and death in a hospital. His wife was celebrating with her new boyfriend in Paris. I just made one call and froze all her accounts. 30 minutes later, she lost her mind. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., piercing through the silence of my Chicago apartment like a knife through my chest. I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Good news never comes at that hour. "Is this Patrick Morrison?" The voice was clinical, professional, the kind that delivers life-altering news every day without flinching. "Yes, this is Patrick." My throat felt dry like sandpaper. I was already sitting up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mr. Morrison, I'm calling from Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. Your son Scott has been in a serious automobile accident. He's in critical condition, and we need you to come immediately." "Patrick?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Scott, my boy. The son I'd barely spoken to in the past 2 years because of that woman he married. Isabella had made it clear that I wasn't welcome in their perfect little life, and like a fool, I'd let the distance grow between us. "How bad is it?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "Mr. Morrison, your son sustained severe head trauma and internal injuries. He's currently in an induced coma. The next 48 hours are critical." I felt the blood drain from my face. An induced coma, critical condition. The words echoed in my mind as I struggled to process them. "I'll be there as soon as possible." "Is his wife there? Isabella?" There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. "We've been trying to reach Mrs. Morrison as well. She was listed as his emergency contact, but we haven't been able to connect with her yet." Something cold settled in my stomach. Haven't been able to connect with her? What kind of wife doesn't answer when her husband is dying in a hospital? "I'm flying out immediately," I said, already throwing off the covers and reaching for my clothes. "Tell Scott I'm coming. Tell him his father is coming." The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. I called my assistant, had her book the first flight to Miami, and threw whatever I could grab into a suitcase. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. 28 years ago, I'd held that little boy in my arms for the first time, promising him I'd always be there to protect him. And where had I been when he needed me most? 1,000 miles away, nursing my wounded pride because his wife had made it clear I wasn't good enough for their social circle. The drive to O'Hare felt eternal. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed was another minute Scott was fighting for his life without me there. I kept thinking about the last conversation we'd had 3 months ago at his birthday dinner. Isabella had been icy toward me the entire evening, making subtle digs about my working-class background, and how Scott had elevated himself since their marriage. Scott had barely looked at me, nodding along with whatever she said like a trained dog. I'd left that dinner angry and hurt, telling myself that if my son wanted to choose his snobbish wife over his father, that was his choice. Now, sitting in my car racing toward the airport, I realized how petty and stupid I'd been. Scott was still my son, still that little boy who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories and throw a baseball with him in the backyard. The flight to Miami was the longest 4 hours of my life. I stared out the window into the darkness, replaying every argument, every missed call, every invitation I'd declined because I knew Isabella would make the evening miserable. I'd let my pride cost me precious time with my son, and now I might never get that time back. When the plane finally touched down in Miami, I was the first one off, practically running through the terminal. The taxi driver must have seen the desperation in my face because he didn't say a word during the ride to the hospital, just drove fast and got me there. Jackson Memorial Hospital loomed before me like a fortress, all concrete and glass, and the antiseptic smell that seems to cling to every medical facility. I rushed to the information desk, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Scott Morrison," I gasped to the receptionist. "My son, he was in a car accident. I'm Patrick Morrison, his father." She typed something into her computer, then looked up at me with sympathetic eyes. "ICU, 7th floor. Take the elevator on your left." The elevator ride seemed to take forever. When the doors finally opened, I was hit with the sounds and smells of the intensive care unit. Beeping machines, hushed voices, that particular hospital smell that makes your stomach turn. A nurse directed me to room 714. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I walked into that room. Scott, my strong, vibrant son, lay motionless on the bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. His face was swollen and bruised beyond recognition, and the steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound proving he was still alive. I sank into the chair beside his bed, my legs giving out underneath me. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my son lying there, fighting for his life while I'd been 1,000 miles away, angry over something so trivial it seemed ridiculous now. "I'm here, son," I whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. It was warm but lifeless, no response to my touch. "Daddy's here. I'm not going anywhere." That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The visitor log by his bed showed only medical staff entries for the past 3 days. Where the hell was Isabella? I hadn't left Scott's side for 18 hours. The nurses had brought me coffee and tried to convince me to get some rest, but I couldn't bring myself to leave him alone again. Every beep of those machines reminded me that my son was clinging to life, and I'd already lost too much time with him. Dr. Rodriguez, Scott's neurologist, came by during his morning rounds. He was a kind man with gentle eyes who seemed to understand that I needed hope as much as medical facts. "The swelling in his brain is starting to go down," he told me, checking Scott's chart. "That's a very good sign. We should be able to start reducing the sedation in the next day or two." "Hi, thank God," I whispered, squeezing Scott's hand. "When will we know if there's any permanent damage?" "We won't know the full extent until he wakes up, but the early signs are encouraging. Your son is young and strong. That's working in his favor." As Dr. Rodriguez prepared to leave, I asked the question that had been eating at me since I arrived. "Doctor, has anyone else been here to see Scott? His wife?" Dr. Rodriguez frowned, consulting his notes. "Mrs. Morrison came by briefly the first day after the accident. She spoke with the emergency room doctor and then left. We haven't seen her since." The first day, that was 4 days ago. My son had been fighting for his life for 4 days, and his wife had visited once and then disappeared. What kind of woman does that? After the doctor left, I pulled out my phone and tried calling Isabella's number. It went straight to voicemail, just like it had the dozen other times I'd tried. Her greeting was sickeningly sweet, all fake warmth and practiced charm. "You've reached Isabella Morrison. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message, and I'll get back to you soon." I left another message, though I was beginning to suspect she wasn't planning to call back. "Isabella, this is Patrick. Scott is in critical condition at Jackson Memorial Hospital. He needs his wife here. Call me back immediately." That afternoon, I was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair when a nurse named Maria came in to check Scott's vitals. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who'd been taking extra care of Scott since I arrived. "You know," she said quietly as she adjusted his IV, "it's nice to see someone who actually cares about their family member. We see a lot of people come through here, and trust me, not everyone has someone who stays by their side like you're doing." "What do you mean?" I asked, though something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Maria glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but that first day, when your son's wife was here, she was on her phone the whole time talking about travel plans. Even when the doctor was explaining how serious his condition was, she was more interested in her conversation than listening." My hands clenched into fists. Travel plans. While Scott was unconscious and broken, Isabella was making travel plans. "Did you hear where she was going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Maria hesitated, then shook her head. "I really shouldn't say any more, but I will tell you this, that young man is lucky to have a father like you." After she left, I sat there stewing in my anger and disbelief. What kind of person abandons their spouse in a hospital to go on vacation? I thought about all the times Isabella had complained about Scott working too much, about him not being attentive enough to her needs. Now, when he needed her most, she was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into social media. Isabella was active on Instagram, always posting perfectly curated photos of her life. If she was traveling, She'd be documenting every moment of it. What I found made my blood run cold. Her most recent post was from yesterday, a picture of her holding a glass of champagne in what looked like a first-class airplane cabin. The caption read, "Finally, time for some much-needed R&R. Sometimes you have to put yourself first." I scrolled down to see more photos from the past few days. Isabella at an expensive restaurant. Isabella shopping in what looked like European boutiques. Isabella posing in front of what I recognized as the Eiffel Tower. She was in Paris. While Scott fought for his life in a Miami hospital, his wife was living it up in Paris. But what made me truly sick was seeing who was with her. In several photos, carefully cropped, but not carefully enough, I could see a man's arm around her shoulder, a man's hand holding hers. One photo showed 2 champagne glasses, clearly indicating she wasn't alone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the comments on her posts. Friends were commenting things like, "You deserve this," and "Have fun, gorgeous," as if they had no idea that Scott was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. I screenshot every single post, my rage building with each image. 4 days. Scott had been in critical condition for 4 days, and not only had Isabella abandoned him, she was parading her new romance all over social media for the world to see. I called her number again, and this time, when it went to voicemail, I didn't hold back. "Isabella, this is Patrick. I know you're in Paris. I've seen your Instagram posts. While your husband is in a coma fighting for his life, you're playing tourist with some man. I don't know what kind of person you think you are, but this is disgusting even for you. Scott deserves better than this. He's always deserved better than you." I hung up, my heart pounding with fury. But anger wasn't going to help Scott. I needed to think, to plan. Isabella clearly had no intention of coming back, which meant someone needed to make medical decisions for Scott if his condition changed. Someone needed to protect his interests while he couldn't protect himself. I walked over to Scott's bed and took his hand again. He looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. How could the woman who'd promised to love him in sickness and in health just abandon him like this? "Don't worry, son," I whispered. "I'm going to take care of everything, and when you wake up, you're going to see exactly who the people in your life really are." The next morning brought news that made everything even more complicated. Dr. Rodriguez found me in Scott's room, holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss your son's medical decisions. Normally, his wife would be the one we'd consult, but since we can't reach her, she's in Paris," I said flatly. "She's been there for days, while Scott's been fighting for his life." Dr. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "I see. Well, in that case, we should discuss medical power of attorney. Do you know if Scott has any legal documents designating who should make decisions if he's incapacitated?" A cold realization washed over me. If Scott had given Isabella medical power of attorney, she could make life or death decisions from her Paris vacation. She could decide to withdraw care, to move him to a cheaper facility, to do whatever served her interests, rather than his. I had to find out what legal documents Scott had signed, and I had to find out fast. I spent the next morning making calls from Scott's hospital room while he lay motionless beside me. First, I contacted his lawyer, then his accountant, and finally his business partner. What I discovered made my blood boil with a rage I hadn't felt since my own divorce 20 years ago. Scott's lawyer, David Chen, met me at the hospital that afternoon. He was a sharp man in his 40s who'd handled Scott's business contracts, but his expression when he walked into the room told me he had bad news. "Patrick, I'm going to be straight with you," David said, settling into the chair across from me. "Scott gave Isabella power of attorney over his medical and financial affairs when they married 3 years ago. It's standard for most couples. But given the current circumstances, she can pull the plug on him if she wants to," I finished, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Theoretically, yes. She can make medical decisions, access his accounts, even sell assets if she deems it necessary for his care." David paused, studying my face. "Patrick, where exactly is Isabella right now?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the Instagram posts I'd screenshotted. "Paris? Having the time of her life while her husband fights for his life." David's face went pale as he scrolled through the images. This is beyond callous. And who is this man she's with?" I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper so the nurses wouldn't overhear. David, I need you to tell me exactly what kind of access Isabella has to Scott's finances. All of it. David pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through documents. She's a signatory on all his personal accounts, joint owner of their house, and she has access to the business accounts as well, since Scott listed her as his business partner's emergency contact for financial matters. Business accounts? My stomach dropped. Scott had built a successful consulting firm over the past 5 years. If Isabella could access those funds... Patrick, I'm going to check something. David's fingers flew across his tablet. After a few minutes, his face went white. Oh, Christ. What is it? I have access to Scott's business account records through our legal portal. There have been significant withdrawals over the past 2 weeks, large transfers to what looks like Isabella's personal account. I felt like I might vomit. How much? $85,000, all transferred in the weeks leading up to the accident. David looked up at me with horror in his eyes. Patrick, it looks like she was planning something. These transfers weren't random expenses. My mind was racing. Isabella had been systematically draining Scott's accounts before the accident. This wasn't grief or shock making her disappear to Paris. This was premeditation. She'd been planning to leave him, and the accident had just given her the perfect opportunity to disappear with his money. There's more, David said grimly. I'm looking at their joint credit cards, plane tickets to Paris, purchased 5 days before the accident, hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, shopping expenses. She's been planning this trip for weeks. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. Isabella hadn't just abandoned Scott in his time of need, she'd robbed him first. David, what can we do legally? Can we freeze the accounts? With Scott incapacitated and Isabella having power of attorney, it's complicated, but... He paused, thinking, there might be a way. If we can prove she's abandoned her responsibilities as his medical proxy and is acting against his interests, we could petition for emergency guardianship. Do it, I said without hesitation, whatever it takes. After David left, I sat alone with Scott, my mind churning with anger and disbelief. I thought about all the warning signs I'd ignored because I'd been too proud to interfere in his marriage. Isabella's constant complaints about money, her expensive tastes, the way she'd always seemed more interested in what Scott could provide than in Scott himself. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found photos that made my blood run cold. They were clearly taken by someone who knew Isabella. Candid shots of her in Paris with a man I now recognized as Marcus Webb, Scott's former business partner. The man Scott had trusted enough to give access to company accounts. The photos showed them laughing together at dinner, kissing on a bridge over the Seine, shopping arm in arm on the Champs-Élysées. But what made my hands shake with rage was the timestamp on the photos. They were taken yesterday and today, while Scott was still in critical condition. The text message that came with the photos was from someone named Jennifer. I thought you should know what Isabella's really doing. I used to work with her, and I can't stand seeing Scott being treated like this. There are more photos if you need them. I immediately called the number. Jennifer turned out to be a former colleague of Isabella's who'd quit because she couldn't stand Isabella's manipulative behavior. Mr. Morrison, Jennifer said, I'm so sorry about Scott. He's a good man, and he doesn't deserve this. Isabella's been bragging to anyone who'll listen about her European adventure with Marcus. She's been planning this for months. Months? My voice came out as a croak. She's been having an affair with Marcus for almost a year. They've been funneling money out of Scott's account slowly so he wouldn't notice. I have emails, text messages, proof of everything if you need it. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. This wasn't just abandonment. This was calculated theft and betrayal on a massive scale. Jennifer, can you send me everything you have? Scott's going to need all the evidence we can get. Already on its way to your email. And, Mr. Morrison, Isabella thinks Scott's going to die. She told Marcus that if he doesn't make it, she'll inherit everything and they can start their new life together without any complications. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Isabella was actually hoping Scott would die. My son's own wife was sitting in Paris, hoping he wouldn't recover so she could inherit his assets and run off with her lover. I looked at Scott lying there so still and vulnerable, and something hardened inside me. Isabella had underestimated one crucial thing. She'd forgotten that Scott had a father who would fight for him, and I was about to show her exactly what that meant. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First to David Chen, then to my own lawyer, then to a private investigator I'd used in my business dealings. If Isabella wanted to play games while my son fought for his life, I was going to make sure she lost everything. But first, I was going to make sure she couldn't access another penny of Scott's money. I might not have power of attorney, but I had something Isabella had overlooked. I was Scott's father, and I had connections she'd never dreamed of. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had assembled a team that would make Isabella's perfect little Paris vacation turn into a nightmare. My lawyer, my accountant, a private investigator, and David Chen all worked through the night to build what we called Operation Protect Scott. The first step was the most satisfying. Using the evidence Jennifer had provided about Isabella's systematic theft and abandonment of her medical proxy duties, we filed an emergency petition for me to become Scott's temporary guardian. Judge Martinez, who'd been on the bench for 30 years, took one look at the Instagram posts of Isabella partying in Paris while Scott lay unconscious and signed the order immediately. This is one of the most callous cases of spousal abandonment I've ever seen, she told me, as she signed the papers. Your son is lucky to have a father willing to fight for him. The moment that signature was dry, I became Scott's legal guardian with full authority over his medical and financial decisions. Isabella's power of attorney was suspended pending a full investigation into her actions. The second step was even more satisfying. I called my banker, Tom Stevens, who'd been handling my business accounts for 15 years. Tom had connections at every major bank in the country, and he owed me several favors from deals I'd helped him close. Tom, I need you to freeze every account my daughter-in-law has access to. All of them. Joint accounts, credit cards, business accounts, everything. Patrick, you know I can't just... I'm Scott's legal guardian now, I interrupted, faxing him a copy of the court order. And I have evidence that Isabella has been systematically stealing from him while he's been in a coma. This is fraud, Tom. Criminal fraud. Within 2 hours, every account Isabella had access to was frozen solid. Her credit cards, debit cards, the joint checking account, even the emergency credit line Scott had set up for his business, all of it was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I was sitting in Scott's hospital room at 11:30 p.m. when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the international number, but I had a feeling I knew exactly who was calling. Hello, Isabella, I said calmly. Patrick, what the hell have you done? Her voice was shrill, panicked, completely different from the cool, controlled tone she usually used. My cards aren't working. The hotel is threatening to kick me out. What did you do? I protected my son from a thief, I replied, my voice steady as ice. Did you really think you could steal from Scott while he was fighting for his life and get away with it? I didn't steal anything. That money was mine too. We're married. Were you married when you booked that Paris vacation 5 days before Scott's accident? Were you thinking about your husband when you were transferring $85,000 from his business accounts? Were you being a loving wife when you abandoned him in the hospital to go play house with Marcus Webb? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. That's right, Isabella. I know about Marcus. I know about the affair, the planned theft, all of it. What I want to know is how you could look at my son lying there unconscious and think it was the perfect time for a romantic getaway. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold, calculating. Scott is going to die anyway, Patrick. The doctors said the brain damage could be severe. I'm not going to waste my life taking care of a vegetable. My grip on the phone tightened so hard I thought it might crack. He's not going to die, Isabella, and he's not brain damaged. The doctors are very optimistic about his recovery. Another silence, then a bitter laugh. Of course they are. They always say that to keep hope alive. But I've done my research, Patrick. Head injuries like Scott's don't just heal completely. Your research? You mean the 30 seconds you spent with his doctor before running off to Paris? I'm not coming back, she said firmly. I'm done with that life, done with Scott, done with all of it. You can have your precious son back. Actually, Isabella, you are coming back. Because right now, you're stranded in Paris with no money, no credit, and Marcus Webb is about to find out that all the business accounts he's been stealing from are frozen too. Your boyfriend is probably getting some very interesting phone calls from his bank right about now. I heard her sharp intake of breath. You can't do this. I have rights. You had rights when you were Scott's wife and medical proxy, but you abandoned those rights when you left him here to die while you went off to play with your boyfriend. The court agrees with me. The court? What court? Patrick, what did you do? I did what you should have done from the beginning. I'm taking care of Scott. I'm his legal guardian now, Isabella. You have no authority over his medical care, his finances, or anything else. And when he wakes up, and he will wake up, he's going to know exactly what kind of person he married. The line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing, fast and panicked. You're bluffing, she finally said, but her voice shook. You can't just take away my rights like that. Check your email, I said calmly. I had my lawyer send you copies of all the court documents. You have 72 hours to return to Miami for a hearing, or you'll be found in contempt of court. Oh, and Isabella? The Miami police are very interested in talking to you about the unauthorized transfers from Scott's business accounts. Something about fraud and theft during a medical emergency. You bastard, she hissed. No, Isabella, I'm a father protecting his son from a predator. Something you clearly don't understand. I hung up and immediately called Jennifer, who answered on the first ring. How did it go? She asked. Perfect. She's panicking, and she's going to panic even more when she realizes Marcus is in the same boat. Did you get those bank records I asked for? All of them. Marcus has been siphoning money from Scott's business for months, using Isabella's access codes. They've been planning this for almost a year, Patrick. The Paris trip was supposed to be their celebration before disappearing with Scott's money permanently. I looked over at my son, still unconscious, but looking more peaceful than he had in days. The doctors had said they might be able to start reducing his sedation tomorrow. Jennifer, I want you to know that when Scott wakes up, he's going to need friends who really care about him, people who didn't abandon him when he needed them most. I'll be there, she said simply. Scott deserves better than Isabella, and he's going to realize that soon enough. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was a blocked number. Patrick Morrison? The voice was male, nervous. Who is this? Marcus Webb. Look, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the business accounts. I laughed, actually laughed. The only misunderstanding, Marcus, is that you thought you could steal from my son and get away with it. How are those credit cards working out for you in Paris? I never stole anything. Isabella said she had permission to... Isabella didn't have permission to give you access to accounts that weren't hers. She didn't have permission to transfer business funds to pay for your vacation. And she certainly didn't have permission to plan her husband's financial ruin while he was unconscious in a hospital bed. Look, we can work this out. I can pay the money back. You're going to pay it back whether we work it out or not, Marcus. The question is whether you do it from Paris or from a Miami jail cell. The line went dead. I settled back into my chair beside Scott's bed, feeling more at peace than I had in days. Isabella and Marcus were trapped in Paris with no money, no credit, and a growing legal nightmare waiting for them back home. Meanwhile, Scott was getting the best care possible, surrounded by people who actually gave a damn about him. My phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella. This isn't over. I texted back. You're right, it's not. See you in court. Monday morning brought news that made Isabella's situation go from bad to catastrophic. I was having coffee with David Chen in the hospital cafeteria when he got a call that made him smile for the first time since this nightmare began. That was my contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, he said, hanging up. They're very interested in the Marcus and Isabella show. International wire fraud, theft during a medical emergency, conspiracy to defraud. They're looking at some serious federal charges. But that wasn't the worst news Isabella would get that day. Not by a long shot. I'd spent Sunday night making phone calls to every contact I had in the business world. Scott had built his consulting firm on relationships, trust, and reputation. When word got out that his business partner had been stealing from him while his wife abandoned him in a hospital, Those same business relationships became weapons. The first domino fell at 9 a.m. when Meridian Industries, Scott's biggest client, terminated their contract with Marcus's side of the business, effective immediately. The CEO, Robert Hutchins, called me personally. "Patrick, I've known you for 15 years and I know Scott is cut from the same cloth," he said. "When I heard what that bastard Marcus was doing while your son was fighting for his life, I couldn't get off the phone with our legal department fast enough. We're not just terminating his contracts, we're pursuing legal action for breach of fiduciary duty." By noon, 3 more major clients had dropped Marcus. By 2 p.m., it was 6. Word travels fast in business circles, especially when it involves someone stealing from their comatose partner. But the real devastation came when I implemented the second phase of my plan. See, Isabella had made a crucial mistake when she'd been so eager to get access to Scott's accounts. She'd signed documents making her responsible for the business's debts and liabilities. It was supposed to be a formality, just paperwork, that would let her handle things if Scott was ever unavailable. She'd never imagined that Scott's father might use that signature against her. Working with David and my forensic accountant, we discovered that Marcus had been using company funds not just for the Paris trip, but for months of personal expenses. Expensive dinners, luxury purchases, even rent payments for an apartment he'd been keeping secret from his own wife. The paper trail showed over $200,000 in misappropriated funds. Under the terms of the partnership agreement Isabella had signed, she was personally liable for Marcus's theft, every penny of it. I was sitting beside Scott's bed that afternoon when my phone rang, Isabella's number. "You son of a bitch," she screamed the moment I answered. "What did you do to Marcus's business?" "Nothing that wasn't deserved," I said calmly. "How's Paris treating you now that your credit cards don't work?" "We're stuck here, Patrick. The hotel won't let us check out without paying, and Marcus can't access any of his accounts either." Funny how that works. When you steal from people, eventually there are consequences. "We didn't steal anything," I laughed, a cold sound that seemed to echo in the hospital room. "Isabella, I have bank records showing you and Marcus transferred over $200,000 from Scott's business accounts. I have emails between you two planning to disappear with the money. I have photos of you celebrating in Paris while your husband was unconscious." "What exactly would you call that?" Silence. "But here's the really beautiful part, Isabella. Remember those partnership documents you signed last year? The ones that made you legally responsible for any financial irregularities in the business? Well, congratulations. You're now personally liable for every penny Marcus stole." "That's impossible." "I didn't know. You didn't know your boyfriend was stealing from your husband? You didn't know you were helping him transfer funds illegally? Isabella, we have text messages between you two discussing the thefts. We have evidence that you provided him with access codes. You were a willing participant in everything." I could hear her crying now, the mask of sophistication finally slipping away. "Please, Patrick, I made a mistake. I was confused, emotional about Scott's accident. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking clearly enough to book a vacation to Paris 5 days before the accident. You were thinking clearly enough to transfer $85,000 out of Scott's accounts. You were thinking clearly enough to abandon your husband in his hour of greatest need." "I'll come back. I'll make this right." "Oh, you're definitely coming back, Isabella. The FBI wants to talk to you about international wire fraud. The Miami police have some questions about theft and abandonment. And my lawyer is very excited to discuss your personal liability for Marcus's crimes." Through the phone, I could hear Marcus in the background yelling at someone in French. Apparently, their hotel situation was getting worse. "Patrick, please, I'll pay everything back. I'll sign whatever papers you want. Just make this stop." I looked over at Scott, and for a moment I thought I saw his eyelids flutter. The doctors had been reducing his sedation, and they'd said he might start showing signs of consciousness soon. "You know what's funny, Isabella? A week ago you had everything: a husband who loved you, financial security, a good life. All you had to do was be there for Scott when he needed you most. But you were so busy planning your escape that you forgot one crucial thing." "What?" she whispered. "You forgot that Scott has a father who loves him more than you ever did. And I don't give up on family. What do you want from me? I want you to come home and face the consequences of your actions. I want you to look Scott in the eye when he wakes up and explain why you abandoned him. I want you to explain to a judge why you thought stealing from your comatose husband was acceptable behavior. And if I don't, then you and Marcus can stay in Paris and explain to the French authorities why Interpol is interested in talking to you about international financial crimes. I hear French prisons are lovely this time of year. The line went quiet for a long moment. "We'll be on the next flight home," she finally said, her voice broken. "Good. My lawyer will pick you up at the airport. Oh, and Isabella, don't even think about running. We've already frozen Marcus's passport, and yours will be flagged the moment you try to use it anywhere except for a direct flight to Miami." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Isabella and Marcus were learning that actions have consequences, and their consequences were just getting started. But the best news was yet to come. Dr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with a smile I hadn't seen from him before. "Mr. Morrison, I have good news. We're going to start waking Scott up tomorrow morning. His brain scans show excellent activity, and all his vitals are stable. I'm very optimistic about his recovery." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "He's going to be okay?" "Barring any unforeseen complications, yes. Your son is going to make a full recovery." I looked at Scott, my brave, strong son who'd survived not just the accident, but also the betrayal of the person who was supposed to love him most. Tomorrow he'd wake up to discover the truth about his wife, but he'd also wake up knowing that his father had fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself. And Isabella? She'd be coming home to face the music she'd been dancing to for months. Scott opened his eyes on Tuesday morning at 10:47 a.m., just as Dr. Rodriguez had predicted. I was holding his hand when his fingers twitched, then squeezed mine gently. When his eyes focused on my face, the first word he whispered was, "Dad." "I'm here, son," I said, fighting back tears. "I'm right here." "What happened?" His voice was rough from the breathing tube, but it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Dr. Rodriguez checked his pupils, asked him some basic questions, and confirmed what we'd all hoped for. No significant brain damage, no major cognitive impairment. Scott was going to make a complete recovery. It was 2 hours later, after the medical team had finished their examinations, that Scott asked the question I'd been dreading. "Where's Isabella?" I looked at my son, this brave man who'd survived so much, and I made a decision. He deserved the truth, all of it. "She's on a plane back from Paris," I said simply. Scott's brow furrowed in confusion. "Paris? What was she doing in Paris?" "That's a long story, son. Are you sure you're ready to hear it?" Something in my tone must have warned him because his expression grew serious. "Tell me." So I told him everything, the abandoned visits, the Instagram posts, the affair with Marcus, the stolen money, all of it. I watched my son's face go through a range of emotions, confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally a cold anger I'd never seen from him before. He was in Paris with Marcus while I was in a coma for over a week. "She visited you once, the first day, then disappeared. If it wasn't for some kind nurses and your friend Jennifer sending me evidence, I might never have known the full extent of what she was doing." Scott closed his eyes, processing everything. When he opened them again, they were filled with a pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. "I trusted her with everything, Dad. The business, the house, all of it." "I know, son. But she made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences." That evening, Isabella and Marcus arrived at Miami International Airport to find police officers waiting for them. I wasn't there. I was at the hospital with Scott, but David Chen called to tell me how it went. "They tried to act like victims right until the handcuffs went on," he said. Isabella kept insisting she was just confused and emotional about Scott's accident. Marcus tried to claim he was just helping a friend in need. "What are the charges?" "For now, fraud, theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and abandonment of fiduciary duty. The FBI is still building their case for the federal charges. Isabella's looking at serious prison time, and Marcus might lose everything: his business, his house, his marriage." His wife filed for divorce the moment she found out about the affair and the stolen money. 3 days later, Isabella was released on bail and came to the hospital. I was in Scott's room when the nurse announced that his wife was there to see him. Scott looked at me, and I could see the internal struggle on his face. "Do you want me to stay?" I asked. "Please." Isabella walked into the room looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who'd made my life miserable for 3 years. Her hair was unwashed, her expensive clothes wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd gambled everything and lost. "Scott," she said, her voice breaking, "thank God you're okay." Scott's expression was cold, distant. "Am I? Because according to the doctors, you told them you weren't sure if I'd recover. You told Marcus I might die, and that would make things easier for you too." Isabella's face went white. "I never said that. I was scared, confused." "Isabella." Scott's voice cut through her protests like ice. "I've seen the bank records. I've seen the Instagram posts. I've seen the emails between you and Marcus planning your new life together. Don't stand there and lie to me anymore." She collapsed into the chair by his bed, sobbing. "I made a terrible mistake. I was scared about your injuries, about the future. Marcus convinced me that we needed to protect ourselves financially in case I died or became a vegetable," Scott finished. "Is that what you were hoping for, Isabella? That your inconvenient husband would just disappear so you could run off with your boyfriend and my money?" "No, Scott, I love you. I've always loved you. You love my money. You love the lifestyle I provided. But you never loved me, Isabella. If you had, you wouldn't have abandoned me the moment things got difficult." I watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because Scott was handling this with more grace and strength than I would have at his age. Sadness because I could see the pain behind his controlled exterior. "I can change," Isabella pleaded. "We can go to counseling. I'll make this right." Scott was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, final. "The only thing you're going to make right is returning every penny you stole. My lawyer will handle the divorce paperwork. I don't want to see you again, Isabella. Ever." "Scott, please, get out." His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Get out and don't come back." Isabella looked at me with desperate eyes as if I might intervene on her behalf. I stared back at her with cold indifference. "You heard my son," I said simply. After she left, Scott and I sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally he spoke. "Dad, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For letting her drive a wedge between us. For choosing her over you all those times. For not seeing what she really was." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Son, you don't owe me any apologies. You loved your wife, and there's no shame in that. The shame is all hers. I missed you, Dad. These past 2 years, I missed having you in my life. I missed you too, more than you know." 6 months later, Scott was completely recovered and had rebuilt his business stronger than ever. The clients who dropped Marcus came back to work exclusively with Scott, impressed by his integrity and his handling of the crisis. Isabella pled guilty to multiple fraud charges and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Marcus got 5 years and lost everything: his business, his house, his marriage, his reputation. They'd destroyed their lives for a few months of stolen luxury, but the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was what Scott and I built together in the aftermath. I sold my business in Chicago and moved to Miami to be closer to Scott. We became partners in his consulting firm, combining his technical expertise with my business relationships. We had dinner together twice a week, talked on the phone daily, and slowly rebuilt the relationship that Isabella had tried so hard to destroy. One evening, as we sat on Scott's patio watching the sunset over Biscayne Bay, he turned to me with a smile. "You know what the funny thing is, Dad?" "What's that?" "Isabella thought she was getting rid of dead weight when she tried to push you out of my life. She never realized she was the dead weight all along." I raised my beer bottle in a mock toast. "To getting rid of dead weight." "To family," Scott countered, clinking his bottle against mine. "The real kind." As I looked at my son, healthy, happy, and free from the woman who'd tried to destroy him, I realized that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best outcomes. Scott's accident had been terrible, but it had shown us both what really mattered. Isabella had tried to steal Scott's money, his business, and his life. Instead, she'd given us something priceless. She'd given us back each other. and that was worth more than all the money in the world.